But there are these strange sort of parallels, and first of all, I thought this idea of connecting the two was completely bonkers. And then the more I played with it and thought, well, what a fantastic play anyway to have as the structure for writing about the Brontes. The actual structure of Chekhov's play is so good that I just began to see whether I couldn't reinvent the three sisters as the Bronte sisters and develop some sort of narrative out of that. And I was able to keep a lot of stuff that was true about the Brontes, factual stuff, but I found myself, in order to stick to the plot and stick to, if you like, the love interest, the romantic interest, which was slight in the case of the Brontes, that I had to invent a couple of characters, a local teacher, for instance, and a local doctor. And the Brontes would have had contact with local teachers and local doctors for sure, but there isn't any, firm evidence that they were ever chatted up by them. But I made that part of the narrative, which was a way of sticking to Chekhov. But that sort of cheeky invention allowed me to draw on what's there in Wuthering Heights, what's there in Jane Eyre, because they talk a lot about marriage and love and romance and sexual desire. And so a lot of the lines that Charlotte and Emily and Anne have in the play are really coming from Bronte novels or from letters that I drew on. There is of course the whole thing about them being stuck in the provinces and dreaming of a life in London. Actually, they felt very ambivalent about London, but they depended for their publishing on London. I wanted to slightly get away from the image of the Brontes as being in this remote spot and having no intellectual life and just being thrown back on their own resources. If you read the biographies, you see actually, there was quite a lot going on locally and culturally. And although, yes, Haworth's remote in its way, and there's the moors, and that's very important, they weren't intellectually deprived. Patrick was their father getting journals, and they were meeting people, and they went and heard concert recitals in Keighley, and they used local libraries, and so they were not utterly cut off. I grew up near Haworth, not too far anyway, and I also grew up, facing a moor, and I had an Irish mother, so there were a few, and lived in a vicarage. I grew up in a vicarage, so there were a few parallels there. And of course, like anybody else, especially any teenager that comes across the Brontes, they have a huge impact. I have to say, for me, probably Jane Eyre more than Wuthering Heights, but both of them. Yeah, well, I did slightly draw on received images, I think, of the three sisters, and Emily, of course, is the kind of wild, romantic, unworldly one of the three. Also, interestingly, and it's really came over with the whole business of publishing. When Anne and Charlotte went off to London to see the publishers and to say, we are three sisters, we are not these pseudonyms, forget it, we're women. Emily wanted no part of that. She wouldn't go with them. She didn't agree with that decision, and there's some desire for anonymity and remoteness on her part. What was interesting with the play, I always remember that after one of the early shows, there was a youngish, 10, 12-year-old girl in the audience, and she was desperate to meet the actress who played Emily backstage because something about that romantic air that Emily had come over in the performance, and I think she is a haunting figure. So many people have been haunted by her over the years, from Kate Bush.
Kate Bush physically, that dance on the video.
And I think we think of in terms of interaction with nature and the moors, we think, and trekking out there in all weathers, we think that Emily was the one that was doing most of that, and also, you know, the one who sort of got down to it in the kitchen more, and you know, was with the dogs and peeling the potatoes and so on. So there was a sort of practical side to it too, but she was unworldly. Well, there's a wonderful image. I think it's probably in the Elizabeth Gaskell biography of the three of them after Patrick winds up the clock and goes to bed at 9 o'clock. Then the writing starts, and the three of them circling the dining room table, talking, discussing their plot, sharing their ideas, and having done so really from, of course, a very early age, creating their fantasy worlds as children and then going on to be grown-up novelists. So there is that real sense of them drawing on each other. However, they are completely separate writers, completely separate temperaments. And, you know, for instance, when Wuthering Heights, probably, whether it was for the first time or a later edition after Emily's death, when Charlotte introduced it to the public, wrote some sort of preface, there was a tone of embarrassment and apology for the way she presents it as being a bit uncouth, a bit. She is, to be fair, addressing some of the criticisms that it had, but she's also signalling we are very different writers. I think it was revolutionary. I think that the Jane Eyre might be a more accomplished novel, but that Wuthering Heights is the more revolutionary text. And there's nothing to suggest it was drawn from personal experience. There are biographical origins for Heathcliff. There was a curate that the three sisters were kind of addicted to, but I'm sure he was nothing like Heathcliff. So I think it was coming out of her reading and her imagination, that Gothic strain in the novel. And you know, it is truly one of the most imaginative creations you could imagine, that you could think of, because you know, most novelists, one way or another, draw on their own lives and autobiography, but I think this is really thrown free of their lives, not of the setting, obviously. You know, the place. Okay, she draws on that, but in creating Heathcliff, where did he come from? No, I mean, you've got some sympathy with Heathcliff when, as it were, she betrays him when she's still very young, out of, it does seem almost something sadistic. I mean, of course he's sadistic, but in choosing, as it were, a posh world in preference to him, and he feels to be banished. You know, there's that wonderful moment when there's children and together, Catherine Heathcliff, and they peer through the window of Thrushcross Grange at this sort of bourgeois, well lit, well upholstered interior, and they're on the outside. But then, of course, she's inside, and she enters that world. And once she enters that world, it changes her, and Heathcliff is left out, and his cruelty and his sadism, which potentially could have been redeemed, you feel, you know, after that. He has it with a vengeance. So I think all that's pretty interesting to go on thinking about and analysing. It's one of the reasons the text endures, because I think your sympathies as a reader can go in different ways. Also, the whole business of Heathcliff's, for want of a better word, ethnicity. You know, the gypsy idea, gypsy boy from Liverpool. Carol Phillips, the Leeds Afro-Caribbean novelist, is about to produce next year a Brontë book, a novel, in which he has been. I'm sure that a lot of his interest will be in Heathcliff and the origins of Heathcliff, as well as having the Yorkshire interest that I have. We'll have to see, but this book is coming out in April 2015. Yeah, well, again, that's sort of lot of interest to us now, because we see in our society today, particularly, the fear of the other is such a big thing, and that's what part of what Heathcliff represents. It's also sort of part of what is attractive about him, but feared at the same time. No, I think that's another aspect of it, really, is that you don't have to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, or even to be particularly gothic in what you're drawn to feel compelled by Wuthering Heights, because there's enough of that quotidian world and that, well, all that dialect, you know, all the, as it were, is it Nellie and Joseph and the servants and all that. There's something very rooted about it, as well as, you know, there's something earthly as well as unearthly.